The emergency beacon cut through space like a scream in the darkness. Its automated message played on every major communication channel across 3 galactic sectors, the universal distress code pulsing with desperate urgency. "This is colony ship Serenitas of the Velthari Republic. We are experiencing catastrophic system failures, primary life support failing, hull breaches on multiple decks, requesting immediate assistance, 800,000 souls aboard, coordinates attached. Please, anyone who receives this, we need help." The message repeated every 30 seconds, each iteration carrying the growing weight of impending disaster. In the gleaming towers of the Galactic Coordination Center on Nexus Prime, emergency operators scrambled to process the distress call. The Serenitas was a massive colony vessel, one of the largest ever constructed by the peaceful Velthari. It carried nearly 1 million civilians to establish a new settlement on the Rim worlds, far from the conflicts that plagued the inner systems. Commander Zephix of the Alteran Navy received the alert within minutes. His scaled fingers danced across the holographic display, calculating response times and available assets. The Serenitas was located in deep space, 3 days away from the nearest Alteran patrol fleet at maximum burn. His people were known throughout the galaxy for their technological prowess and efficient rescue operations. "Dispatch the 5th Rescue Squadron," he commanded his aide. "Full emergency protocols. They should reach the Serenitas in 72 hours. Similar scenes played out across dozens of species command centers. The Cathera Collective, masters of space-time manipulation, began preparing their reality-bending rescue ships. Even at their advanced speeds, they calculated a 60-hour journey to reach the distress signal. The Morphic Union, whose shape-shifting biology made them excellent at emergency medicine, began organizing medical support vessels that could arrive within 4 days. On the gas giant stations of Proxima Centauri, the Ethereal Congress convened in emergency session. These ancient beings of pure energy could traverse vast distances quickly, but their rescue capabilities were limited to non-physical assistance. Still, they began preparations to offer what aid they could. Each species approached the crisis with their particular strengths and methodical planning. Committees were formed, resources allocated, and bureaucratic procedures followed even in the face of emergency. This was how civilized species responded to disasters, with careful coordination and proper protocols. But there was one message that stood out from all the official responses, transmitted on a simple, unencrypted channel that bypassed all diplomatic networks. "Serenitas, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We have received your distress call. Help is on the way. Hold on." In the bridge of the massive human dreadnought Indomitable, Admiral Chen stood before a tactical display showing the position of the Serenitas. Her weathered face bore the marks of someone who had seen too many battles, but her eyes held unwavering determination. Around her, the bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, their movements quick and decisive. "Navigation. How long to reach the Serenitas at maximum burn?" she asked. Lieutenant Commander Torres looked up from his console, his face pale. "Admiral, at flank speed we can be there in 18 hours, but we'll burn through our entire fuel reserves and stress the engines beyond recommended limits." "And if we take the standard approach?" 36 hours at sustainable speed." Admiral Chen didn't hesitate. "Flank speed. Signal the entire battle group. All ships are to proceed at maximum burn immediately. We'll worry about fuel and maintenance later." "Ma'am," interjected Commander Harrison, her executive officer, "the other species have already dispatched rescue vessels. The Alterans will arrive in 3 days with proper rescue equipment. Perhaps we should coordinate with them rather than—" "Commander." Chen's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. 800,000 people don't have 3 days. They don't have 36 hours. Look at the data from their distress beacon. The main screen shifted to display the technical readouts from the Serenitas. Life support was failing across multiple sections. Hull breaches were causing atmospheric loss. Power systems were cascading toward total failure. They have maybe 24 hours before those life support failures become irreversible, Chen continued. Every minute we waste discussing protocol is a minute those people don't have. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. In 18 hours, they could be the difference between life and death for nearly 1 million beings, but the cost would be enormous, potentially damaging their own ships beyond repair, stranding themselves in deep space with no way home. "Admiral," came the voice of Chief Engineer Santos through the comm system, "I've been monitoring the conversation. My teams are already implementing emergency power protocols. We can give you every erg of energy these engines can handle, but I can't guarantee what condition we'll be in when we arrive." Chen smiled grimly. "Understood, Chief. Do whatever you have to do." Within minutes, the human fleet was accelerating away from their patrol route. The Indomitable led the formation, her massive engines burning so bright they looked like miniature stars. Behind her, 12 heavy cruisers and twice as many destroyers followed suit, their crews working frantically to squeeze every bit of speed from their vessels. What the other species didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that humans had evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Earth was a death world by galactic standards, where natural disasters, predators, and environmental extremes had forged humanity in the fires of constant struggle. They had learned that sometimes survival meant taking risks that seemed insane to more cautious species. As word of the human response spread through diplomatic channels, it caused quite a stir among the various alien governments. "They're going to damage their own ships permanently," observed Minister Kell of the Alteran Council. "This is exactly the kind of reckless behavior we've come to expect from the humans." "Indeed," agreed Coordinator Vice of the Kithara Collective. "While their intentions may be noble, their methods are inefficient. They will likely arrive too exhausted and damaged to provide meaningful assistance." "Perhaps," mused Elder Thane of the Morphic Union, "but there is something to be said for their immediacy of response. We are still calculating optimal approach vectors while they are already halfway there." The debate continued in the halls of power, while in the depths of space, the human fleet pushed their ships to the breaking point. Engineering reports flooded in from across the battle group. Overheated reactor cores, stressed hull plating, navigation systems operating far beyond design parameters. Yet not a single ship requested to reduce speed. On the bridge of the heavy cruiser, Defiant, Captain Maria Rodriguez watched her engine readouts with growing concern. The port reactor was running 15% above redline, and her chief engineer had already warned her that they were risking a catastrophic failure. But when she thought about those 800,000 souls waiting in the darkness, the choice was easy. "Engineering, give me another 2%, she ordered. "Captain, I strongly advise 2%, Chief. Find it somewhere." Similar conversations were happening throughout the fleet. Human crews pushed themselves and their ships beyond all reasonable limits, driven by something that other species often struggled to understand. It wasn't glory-seeking or recklessness. It was the fundamental human inability to abandon others in need, regardless of the cost to themselves. Aboard the crippled Serenitas, Captain Veltar of the Velthari watched his ship die around him. The elegant crystalline corridors that had once sparkled with bioluminescent beauty were now dark and cold. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as his crew worked desperately to maintain life support for their massive civilian population. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving multiple response messages. The Alteran 5th Squadron will arrive in approximately 70 hours, the Kithara reality ships in 58 hours, the Morphic Medical Fleet in 96 hours. Veltar's tentacles drooped in despair. Even the fastest response would arrive too late. His engineers had been clear. They had perhaps 20 hours of life support remaining, maybe 30 if they began emergency rationing and shut down non-essential sections. Wait, Captain, the communications officer continued. There's another message from the humans. They say they'll be here in 18 hours. 18 hours. Veltar's bioluminescent patches flared with disbelief. That's impossible. They would have to burn their ships to achieve such speed. The message is authentic, sir. It's from Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. She says, and I quote, "Hold on. We're coming." For the first time in hours, Veltar felt a flicker of hope. The humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy. They were the newcomers, the ones from the impossible world where everything was designed to kill. They were considered reckless, unpredictable, and far too willing to take risks that more sensible species would never consider. But they were also known for something else. They never, ever abandoned anyone who needed help. "Broadcast this to all sections," Veltar ordered. "The humans are coming. We just need to hold on for 18 more hours." Throughout the massive colony ship, the message spread like wildfire. In the crowded refugee sections where families huddled together in the cold, in the medical bays where the injured waited for help that might never come, in the engineering spaces where teams worked frantically to buy them precious minutes. Everywhere the word spread. The humans were coming. And for the first time since the crisis began, the people of the Serenitas dared to hope that they might see another sunrise. In the depths of space, the human fleet continued their desperate race against time, their ships screaming through the void like arrows fired from the bow of determination itself. Behind them, they left a trail of superhot plasma and the hopes of nearly 1,000,000 souls. 18 hours to save 800,000 lives. For any other species, it would have been impossible. For humanity, it was just Tuesday. 17 hours and 43 minutes after receiving the distress call, the human battle group dropped out of hyperspace near the Serenitas. The massive colony ship hung in the void like a wounded giant, her once graceful hull scarred by meteor impacts and venting atmosphere from dozens of breaches. Emergency lighting flickered weakly through her transparent aluminum viewports, testament to the failing power systems within. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, studying the tactical display with growing concern. The situation was worse than the distress beacon had indicated. Much worse. "Sensor report," she commanded. Lieutenant Yamamoto looked up from his station, his face grim. "Admiral, the Serenitas has lost primary power to 70% of her sections. I'm reading massive hull breaches on decks 40 through 60. Life support is operating on emergency power only, and atmosphere is venting from at least 30 different points. Internal temperature has dropped to near freezing in most areas. Population status? Thermal sensors indicate approximately 720,000 life signs, mostly concentrated in the central core where life support is still partially functioning. But ma'am..." Yamamoto paused, his voice catching. "We're detecting large areas with no life signs at all. They've already lost people." A moment of silence fell over the bridge. Chen felt the weight of those lost lives, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it now. There were still over 700,000 people depending on them. Time estimate until total life support failure? Based on current degradation rates, maybe 6 hours, possibly less. 6 hours. The Alterans wouldn't arrive for another 54 hours. Even if the Kythera pushed their reality-bending ships to the absolute limit, they were still 36 hours away. The humans were the only hope these people had. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Begin immediate emergency rescue operations. Deploy all available shuttles and rescue pods. Medical teams to stand by. Engineering crews. I want you to prepare for ship-to-ship power transfer and emergency hull patching. We're going to save every soul we can." What happened next would have horrified the safety inspectors of any civilized species. Within minutes, the human fleet had deployed over 200 small craft, shuttles, fighters converted for rescue operations, maintenance pods, and even cargo haulers, anything that could carry people or equipment. They swarmed around the Serenitas like busy insects, their crews working with the kind of desperate efficiency that could only come from a species that had learned to survive on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Commander Jessica Park piloted her assault shuttle directly toward one of the largest hull breaches, her co-pilot, Lieutenant Davis, frantically calculating approach vectors. "Commander! That breach is still venting atmosphere and debris. We can't dock safely with that much turbulence," Davis warned. "Then we don't dock," Park replied, her voice calm despite the insanity of what she was proposing. "We go EVA and patch it from the outside." "Ma'am, the atmospheric pressure differential will make this interesting, yes. Get me a team of volunteers with emergency hull sealant and magnetic grapples. We're going to surf that pressure wave right into the breach." What followed was a maneuver that would have been considered suicidal by any reasonable standard. Park brought her shuttle to within 50 meters of the venting breach and matched velocity with the escaping atmosphere. Then, incredibly, she opened her shuttle's cargo bay and allowed the pressure differential to literally blow her repair team into the breach, where they used magnetic grapples to anchor themselves and began working to seal the rupture from the inside. It should have killed them all. Instead, within 30 minutes, they had sealed a breach that had been venting atmosphere for hours. Similar scenes were playing out across the length of the Serenitas. Human teams were cutting through twisted hull plating with plasma torches, rappelling down elevator shafts to reach trapped civilians, and jury-rigging power connections that bypassed damaged systems entirely. In the ship's main medical bay, Dr. Sarah Kim was working alongside Velthari medical staff to treat the injured. The aliens watched in amazement as the human doctor performed emergency surgery using improvised instruments and techniques that would never be approved by any medical board. "Dr. Kim," said Chief Medical Officer Helvan, his translated voice filled with concern, "are you certain this procedure is safe? Our medical protocols require—" "Your protocols assume you have time and proper equipment," Kim interrupted, not looking up from the patient. "This man has internal bleeding and maybe 10 minutes to live. I can save him with a technique we call field surgery, but it's going to look brutal compared to your methods." She was right. The human approach to emergency medicine was crude by galactic standards, fast, direct, and often involving procedures that made other species wince. But it worked. While Velthari doctors debated the proper protocols for treating patients in zero atmosphere, Dr. Kim was already moving on to her next case, having stabilized 3 critical patients in the time it took to have the discussion. On the engineering decks, Chief Santos had arrived personally to oversee the power transfer operation. The plan was ambitious to the point of madness. Connect the Indomitable's main reactor directly to the Serenitas's power grid, bypassing all safety systems and regulation protocols. "Chief," protested Velthari Chief Engineer Mordak, "this is extremely dangerous. If the power coupling fails, both ships could suffer catastrophic damage." Santos looked at the alien engineer with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "If we don't do this, your life support fails in 4 hours and 700,000 people die. I'd rather risk 2 ships than guarantee the loss of all those lives." The power coupling operation required human engineers to work in the vacuum of space, manually connecting massive power conduits while both ships' electrical systems remained partially active. It was the kind of job that sensible species would spend weeks planning and months implementing. The humans did it in 2 hours. When the connection was complete, lights began flickering back to life throughout the Serenitas. Heating systems activated, life support began functioning at near normal capacity, and the massive ship's computer systems came back online. For the first time in days, the colony ship felt alive again, but the humans weren't finished. Realizing that many sections of the ship were still inaccessible due to structural damage, human engineering teams began what they called creative demolition. Rather than wait for proper cutting equipment, they used shaped charges from their military arsenal to blast through twisted bulkheads and clear debris-blocked corridors. The explosions could be felt throughout the ship, causing the Velthari crew to panic until they realized the humans were using controlled detonations to open rescue routes. It was brutally effective, if terrifying to watch. Captain Rodriguez of the Defiant had taken personal command of one of the most dangerous rescue operations. Deep in the bowels of the Serenitas, an entire section containing nearly 50,000 civilians had been cut off when a reactor explosion sealed their only access corridor. The area was still habitable, but there was no way to reach the trapped people using conventional methods. "We drill," Rodriguez announced to her team. "Captain," her chief engineer protested, "the structural damage in that area is severe. Any vibration from drilling could cause a complete collapse." "Then we don't use drills," Rodriguez replied with a grin that would have terrified any sane person. "We use precision mining charges. We blow a tunnel straight through to them." What followed was an operation that combined military demolitions expertise with mining engineering and a healthy dose of pure human stubbornness. Rodriguez's team carefully placed shaped charges to create a controlled tunnel through 60 meters of twisted metal and debris, calculating each explosion to avoid weakening the ship's structure while still opening a rescue route. It worked perfectly until the last charge, which triggered a small but significant structural collapse that sealed their newly created tunnel. "Well," Rodriguez said, studying the blockage, "we'll just have to go around." Around turned out to mean cutting through the ship's outer hull and approaching from space, requiring the rescue teams to work in full environmental suits while dealing with the vacuum, radiation, and debris fields surrounding the ship. By the time they reached the trapped civilians, Rodriguez and her team had been working for 8 straight hours in conditions that would have challenged professional astronauts. They looked like something out of a nightmare, their environmental suits scorched and patched, their equipment jury-rigged and held together with determination and emergency sealant. But they had reached 50,000 people that every other species would have written off as impossible to save. The Velthari civilians they rescued looked at these strange beings from the death world with a mixture of awe and terror. Here were creatures who had literally blown their way through solid metal and crossed the vacuum of space to reach them, working with tools and techniques that seemed to violate every safety protocol in the galaxy. Yet they had saved them when no one else could. As the rescue operations continued, word of the human efforts spread throughout the galactic communication networks. Other species monitored the situation with growing amazement and concern. "They're working without any safety margins at all," observed Commander Zefix of the approaching Alterran rescue fleet. "Their casualties rates must be enormous." But the human casualty reports told a different story. Despite working in conditions that should have been lethal, despite using techniques that would have been banned by any civilized safety board, the humans had lost exactly 0 personnel. Their reckless methods were backed by skills, experience, and an intuitive understanding of emergency situations that came from evolving on a world where emergency situations were a daily occurrence. 12 hours after arriving at the Serenitas, Admiral Chen received a report that made her smile for the first time in days. "Admiral," reported Commander Harrison, "final evacuation numbers. We've successfully rescued 718,467 civilians. Medical teams report all survivors are stable. Engineering teams have restored full life support to the Serenitas and completed temporary repairs that should keep her operational until proper repair facilities are available." Chen nodded, then asked the question that mattered most. "Casualties? Among the civilians?" "We lost approximately 30,000 before we arrived, mostly from the initial disasters that triggered the emergency. Since beginning rescue operations, we've had 0 civilian fatalities. Our people have suffered some injuries, mostly minor, but no deaths." It was at that moment that the first of the other rescue fleets arrived. The Kythera Collective's reality-bending ships dropped out of their dimensional fold 36 hours ahead of schedule, their crews expecting to find either a successful rescue operation or a massive disaster. What they found instead was something that would be talked about in galactic diplomatic circles for generations to come. The Serenitas hung in space, her hull patched and gleaming with fresh repairs. Her interior lights blazed with full power, and her life support systems hummed with steady efficiency. Around her, human ships maintained protective formations, while evacuation shuttles continued the careful process of transferring the most critically injured civilians to better-equipped medical facilities. It was a textbook rescue operation, except that the textbook had been thrown out the window and replaced with something that could only be described as organized chaos, guided by competent insanity. The Kythera fleet commander, Nexus Prime Velkoth, studied the scene in bewilderment. His species were masters of space and time, capable of manipulating reality itself to achieve their goals. They had expected to arrive and demonstrate their superiority in crisis management. Instead, they found that the primitive humans had already accomplished what should have been impossible. "How did they save so many?" Velkoth asked his aide. "Our projections indicated that at least 300,000 casualties were inevitable." "From what we can determine, sir, they simply refused to accept those projections as accurate. They treated impossible as a technical challenge rather than an absolute limitation." Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the communication channel. "Kythera vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Welcome to the party. We've got the situation mostly under control, but we could use your help with the final evacuations if you're willing to lend a hand." Velkoth found himself in the unusual position of requesting instructions from the species his people considered to be barely civilized newcomers. It was a humbling experience, and one that would change how the Kythera viewed humanity forever. As the combined fleet began the final phase of the evacuation, one thing was clear to everyone present. The humans had arrived first, worked the hardest, taken the greatest risks, and achieved results that no other species would have thought possible. They had turned an inevitable disaster into an improbable victory, using nothing more than determination, ingenuity, and their complete inability to accept that some things simply couldn't be done. And they had done it all in less than 18 hours. 3 days after the rescue began, the space around the former disaster site had become something resembling a small city. The Serenitas floated in the center, her hull gleaming with fresh repairs and her interior fully restored. Around her, ships from a dozen different species formed protective formations, while the final phases of the evacuation continued. Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of the Indomitable, watching the coordinated ballet of rescue operations with satisfaction. The crisis was over. Every single survivor had been accounted for, treated, and either returned to their quarters on the repaired Serenitas or transferred to medical ships for specialized treatment. 718,467 souls saved. It was a number that would be remembered throughout galactic history. "Admiral," Commander Harrison approached with a data pad. "Final casualty and damage reports." Chen took the pad, scanning the numbers with professional interest. The human fleet had pushed their ships far beyond design specifications, burning through fuel reserves and stressing engines to their breaking points. By any reasonable standard, they should have suffered catastrophic mechanical failures. Instead, they had lost exactly one ship. The destroyer Valiant had suffered a reactor containment failure during the final evacuation runs and had to be abandoned. Her crew was safely evacuated, and even the ship herself would be salvageable once proper repair facilities could reach her. The rest of the fleet, while showing signs of the brutal pace they had maintained, was still operational. Human casualties were surprisingly light. 43 injuries, mostly minor, and 0 deaths. The most serious case was Chief Petty Officer Martinez, who had suffered a broken leg during one of the explosive breaching operations. He was already back on duty, his leg in a medical brace and his mood unaffected by the injury. "Any word from the other fleets?" Chen asked. "The Alterans arrived this morning," Harrison reported. "Commander Zephyx requested permission to come aboard and observe our methods. The Morphic medical ships arrived 2 hours ago and are requesting to study our emergency medical procedures. And the Ethereal Congress has sent a formal message of appreciation, I think. Their communication was rather abstract." Chen nodded. Over the past 3 days, representatives from every major galactic civilization had arrived to witness the aftermath of the human rescue operation. What they found had challenged many of their fundamental assumptions about crisis management, safety protocols, and acceptable risk levels. The Velthari, in particular, had been profoundly affected by the experience. Captain Veltar of the Serenitas had requested a formal meeting with Admiral Chen, and she found him waiting in the ship's main conference room. The Velthari captain's bioluminescent patches pulsed with complex patterns that her universal translator identified as deep gratitude mixed with awe. "Admiral Chen," Veltar began, his voice carrying harmonics of emotion that the translator couldn't fully capture. "I must speak with you about what your people have accomplished." "We did what anyone would do, Captain," Chen replied simply. "People were in trouble. We helped." Veltar's patches flared brighter. "No, Admiral. What your people did, it should not have been possible. Our best engineers calculated that we had 6 hours of life support remaining when you arrived. Your rescue operations should have taken days to complete safely. By every logical projection, we should have lost at least half of our population." He paused, studying the human admiral with large, multifaceted eyes that held ancient wisdom. "Yet you saved them all. How?" Chen considered the question carefully. How could she explain to a species that valued careful planning and methodical approaches that sometimes the only way to save lives was to throw caution to the wind and trust in your people's ability to improvise? "Captain, my people come from a world that tries to kill us every day. Earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, predators, diseases. Earth never gave us the luxury of perfect safety. We learned early that sometimes you have to choose between a safe failure and a dangerous success." "But the risks you took," Veltar protested, "cutting through your own ship's safety systems, working in vacuum without proper equipment, using military explosives for rescue operations. Any one of those actions could have resulted in catastrophic failure." Chen smiled. "Could have, yes, but they didn't. That's the difference between our species, Captain. You calculate what might go wrong. We focus on what needs to go right." The meeting was interrupted by an urgent communication from the bridge. A new arrival had just dropped out of hyperspace, a ship unlike any in the gathered fleet. The newcomer was massive, easily twice the size of the Indomitable, with elegant curves and flowing lines that spoke of advanced engineering. Her hull gleamed with an almost organic sheen, and energy patterns flowed across her surface like bioluminescent waves. "Admiral," Harrison's voice crackled through the comm system, "we're being hailed by the, it identifies itself as the cosmic harmony of the Eternal Collective. Sir, that's a progenitor ship." Chen felt her blood go cold. The progenitors were the oldest known civilization in the galaxy, so ancient that most species considered them to be myths. They rarely interfered in the affairs of younger races, observing from a distance with the detached interest of gods watching mortals play in the dirt. What could possibly have drawn their attention to this rescue operation? "Put them through," Chen ordered. The main screen shimmered and resolved into an image that was almost impossible to process. The being that appeared was humanoid in basic shape, but seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their features shifted and flowed like liquid light, and their voice carried harmonics that spoke directly to the mind rather than the ears. I am Archive Keeper Zendara of the Eternal Collective. The entity spoke, their words appearing as much as heard. We have observed the events that have transpired here with great interest. Honored Archive Keeper, Chen replied, hoping she was using the correct form of address. I am Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We were simply responding to a distress call. Indeed, Zendara's form shimmered with what might have been amusement. A response that has exceeded all projections and defied numerous established principles of crisis management. Most intriguing. The progenitor's attention seemed to shift, taking in not just Admiral Chen, but the entire human fleet around them. We have observed many species rise and fall over the eons, each contributing their unique perspectives to the cosmic tapestry. Rarely, however, do we encounter a civilization that so fundamentally challenges the established order. I'm not sure I understand, Chen said carefully. Your species approaches problems with a methodology that other civilizations would consider chaotic, yet you achieve results that surpass their most optimistic projections. You have turned what should have been a disaster of unprecedented proportions into a textbook example of successful crisis resolution. The Archive Keeper paused, their form shifting into configurations that suggested deep contemplation. We have a proposition for your species, Admiral Chen. The Galactic Emergency Response Coalition has operated for millennia under the guidance of various species, each contributing their particular strengths. However, recent events suggest that the coalition would benefit from new perspectives. Chen felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. What exactly are you suggesting? We propose that humanity assume leadership of all galactic emergency response operations. Your methods are unconventional. Your safety protocols are minimal by civilized standards, and your approach to risk assessment is creative. These traits make you uniquely suited to handle situations where conventional wisdom proves inadequate. The implications were staggering. Leadership of galactic emergency response would make humanity one of the most important species in known space, responsible for coordinating rescue operations across thousands of worlds and countless civilizations. Archive Keeper, Chen said slowly. That's an incredible honor, but are you certain? We're still newcomers to galactic society. We've only been spacefaring for a few centuries. Time is not always the best measure of wisdom, Admiral. Your species has demonstrated something that many ancient civilizations have lost: the willingness to risk everything to save others, regardless of the cost to yourselves. This is a rare and precious trait. Zendara's form brightened, projecting patterns that spoke of approval and anticipation. Consider this rescue operation your final examination. You have passed with distinction. The formal proposal will be submitted to the Galactic Council within the standard cycle, but we expect it to receive unanimous approval. Over the following days, as the various fleets began to disperse and the rescued Veltari prepared to continue their journey to their new colony, word of the progenitor proposal spread throughout galactic civilization. The reactions were as varied as the species themselves. The Alterans, despite their initial skepticism, had been impressed by the human rescue techniques and offered to share their advanced medical technology to improve future operations. Commander Zefix himself requested assignment as a liaison officer to learn human emergency response methods. The Kithara Collective, masters of reality manipulation, admitted that their careful, methodical approach to crises had limitations that human spontaneity could address. They offered to provide instantaneous transportation for human rescue teams to any point in the galaxy. The Morphic Union's shapeshifters had watched human medics work with fascination, noting how they adapted their techniques in real time to handle unexpected situations. They requested permission to embed medical observers with human rescue teams to learn these improvisational skills. Even the Ethereal Congress, Beings of pure energy who rarely concerned themselves with physical matters acknowledged that human rescue operations had achieved something they had not thought possible, making the impossible routine through sheer determination and creative problem-solving. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from the Velthari themselves. Captain Veltar, speaking for his entire species, made a formal announcement that would be remembered throughout galactic history. The Velthari Republic hereby pledges our full support and cooperation to any future human emergency response operations. We owe our lives to the courage and skill of Admiral Chen and her fleet. We will not forget. Similar declarations came from dozens of other species, many of whom had been rescued by human forces in various crises over the years. What had begun as a single rescue operation was becoming a galactic movement, with humanity at its center. 6 months later, Admiral Chen found herself standing in the Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime, before representatives of every major civilization in the known galaxy. The formal vote to establish human leadership of the Galactic Emergency Response Coalition was a foregone conclusion, but the ceremony itself was important for diplomatic reasons. When the final vote was counted, unanimous approval, with only 3 abstentions from species that rarely participated in galactic affairs, Chen felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Humanity would now be responsible for coordinating rescue operations across millions of worlds, managing resources from dozens of species, and responding to crises that could affect billions of lives. It was a daunting prospect, but as she looked out at the assembled representatives, she saw something that gave her confidence: respect. Not the grudging acknowledgement that humanity had received as newcomers to galactic society, but genuine respect earned through actions rather than words. The final speaker was Archive Keeper Zendara, whose ageless voice carried across the Great Hall with perfect clarity. Today marks a new chapter in galactic history. For too long, emergency response has been hampered by excessive caution, bureaucratic inefficiency, and the unwillingness to take necessary risks. Humanity has shown us a different way, a path that prioritizes results over procedures, lives over liability, and courage over comfort. The Archive Keeper's form shimmered with approval as they continued. The rescue of the Serenitas will be remembered not just as a successful operation, but as the moment when the galaxy learned that sometimes the most civilized response to a crisis is to act with the heart of a warrior and the determination of those who refuse to accept defeat. As the ceremony concluded and Admiral Chen accepted the formal mandate to lead galactic emergency response operations, a new era began. Across the galaxy, emergency response protocols were quietly updated to include human-style rapid deployment as a standard option. Training programs were established to teach other species the art of constructive improvisation that humans seemed to master instinctively. The Serenitas incident had saved nearly 750,000 lives, but its impact reached far beyond that single rescue. It had fundamentally changed how galactic civilization viewed emergency response, acceptable risk levels, and the value of decisive action over careful deliberation. Most importantly, it had established humanity's role in galactic society not through conquest or politics, but through the simple act of refusing to abandon those in need. Years later, when other species faced their own impossible crises, they would send out their distress signals with a simple addition to the standard message, requesting immediate human response. They had learned that when the situation was truly desperate, when conventional wisdom said that rescue was impossible, there was one species that would ignore the impossible and focus on the necessary. The humans would come. They would arrive before anyone thought possible, work harder than anyone thought reasonable, and achieve results that anyone thought impossible. They would come because somewhere in their genetic memory was the knowledge that on a dangerous world called Earth, the difference between survival and extinction often came down to 3 simple principles: never give up, never leave anyone behind, and never accept that something can't be done just because no one has done it before. Admiral Chen kept the final message from Captain Veltar framed on her office wall, a reminder of why humanity had earned its place among the stars. To Admiral Chen and the crews of the Terran Defense Fleet, you came when no one else could. You succeeded when everyone else said it was impossible. You saved us all when we had given up hope. This is what it means to be human, to face the impossible and make it possible through courage, determination, and an absolute refusal to abandon those who need help. The galaxy is fortunate to have you watching over us. Below it, in smaller text, was a single line that captured the essence of the human approach to emergency response. The humans are coming. Hold on.